Jupiter. This thing is heavy. Now, if we made the standard normal assumptions about how it would operate, the other thing that we were told was that it's coming in on a very elliptical orbit, and we will have pages up that will show how the elliptical orbit works. We do have now on the website, millenniumprophecy.com, we do have some stuff under the science section that shows the perihelion arc over. But eventually we're going to have, my son Jason will have some of the other pictures up showing the elliptical orbit. It has a highly elliptical orbit that is mostly on the southern hemisphere side of the ecliptic plane. Its transit time is about 1,800 years, plus or minus, outbound, and the same thing back. So it's about a round trip of 3,660 years.
Very exactly what Zecharia Sitchin had said about planet Nibiru.
Hi, Letty, but it's not a planet. This sucker is a brown dwarf star. Okay? This
and
thing
dangerous.
is very heavy. Very heavy.
How close does it get to the planet, Gil?
If I've guessed this right, George, we're going to have another set of wake-up, shake-up calls here very shortly. And then May, June, July next year, in its perihelion walk through on this end of its orbit, it's going to get close enough to exchange atmospheric gases with the Earth.
Oh, my God. Now, does this thing act like a huge magnet as well because of its makeup?
It probably does, but that's not what causes the grief. What causes the grief is the fact that because it is so heavy, and it's most likely spinning because just about all
right
objects in space are spinning one way or the other, stars and planets, this thing will spin too. Well, the way that works, when an object has a very powerful baryonic field, it has a lot of mass, and you spin it, it develops node ring or distortion fields. They're like a series of concentric hula hoops. And these concentric hula hoops then are reflected back from the dark matter, dark energy of space, the dark soup, And what you end up with are these concentric rings. Where those rings are around the sun, that's where the planets orbit. Where the rings are around the Earth, that's where the moons are.
Gilbert, let's talk more about these events when we come back. His website, millenniumprophecy.com. It's linked up at CoasttoCoastAM.com. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Well, Friday's a holiday, but we'll be here live for you right here on Coast to Coast AM. And when we come right back, more with our guest Gilbert Eriksen on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie. Our guest tonight, Gilbert. Fascinating work, the Millennium Prophecy. Okay, Gilbert, we're talking about then the tsunami in the plates moving, and that you're saying is sign number one?
No, what I'm saying is that all of the seals have been broken except seal number 6 and seal number 7. When we read the description of the things that will happen with the breaking of seal number 6, and that's Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 14, it describes a list of events that when the seal is broken, you can expect this list to physically play out. Number 1 on the list was a great earthquake. Now remember, when Wormwood last hit the world, it hit the southern hemisphere with that undercutting action, and the island of Sumatra, the tectonic plate it was resting on, was shaking and quaking and rolling and bucking for 10 continuous minutes.
Yes.
That
huge.
is not a normal earthquake where you have a fault line. It slips and the energy is released as the pressure is built up and released. 10 minutes to shake, rattle, and roll, something is wrong. And that's not an earthquake. That's another driver mechanism doing the shaking. Well, in this case, what I'm saying is that was Wormwood calling, hitting us with an outer node ring. All right, number 2 on the list, the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair.
There's the timestamp, 304. Okay, it's the STO AIA 304, 2011, April 1st, 6:59:57 Universal Time. There it is.
That refers to volcanic activity at the tectonic plate edges that finally blow off and blow high tonnages of volcanic ash and dust into the atmosphere. And it can actually darken the skies.
Could it be the Yellowstone caldera?
God, I hope not.
I know it.
If that does, the United States is toast. Okay, number 3, the whole moon became like blood.
In just over an hour, the full moon will turn a deep red for most of the planet, when the longest lunar eclipse in a decade will take place.
This one gets real interesting because Wormwood has the ability to somehow grind or, volcanically discharge its iron oxide dust into or above its atmosphere so that it gets picked up by its own gravitational node rings and distributed outward.
Which is red.
And it's got a red color to it. So when it says the whole moon became like blood, John was looking up, and as the intrusion of iron oxide dust occluded in the atmosphere, he looked at the moon, and it was silver, and then all of a sudden started turning, iron oxide red. Okay, the next item number 4, the stars of the sky fell to the earth. Okay, that can't be stars. It's got to be asteroids or
comets,
space junk, meteorites, whatever. So you can expect some sort of demonstration of meteorite events, not meteor, meteorite, to the earth, actually making contact with the ground. Here's the hard part. This one is tough. Now, you mentioned Yellowstone, the caldera. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up. I said, wait a minute, John, that's backwards. When it's rolled out. No. When it's rolled up. Okay, what's the sky split apart? If St. John was looking up, was near the cone of the crater when this thing went off, the concussion of a pyroclastic explosion would feel like the sky was splitting apart.
Absolutely.
So what he was doing is he was seeing an event similar to Mount St. Helens or Mount Vesuvius. When Krakatoa blew its top back in the 1800s, the concussion could be heard 1,200 miles away. That's a lot of concussion.
That's huge.
So if St. John wrote the sky was split apart, he must have felt one massive concussion. Now, we better hope and pray that the Yellowstone caldera doesn't blow, because if it does, a priori, most of the United States is toast. But the United States is not the only place where something like this could happen. It could be anywhere. If the caldera blows at the northern end of New Zealand, for example, half of New Zealand blows away. So wherever this one is, he's calling, at least from the best that I can tell, he's referring to a pyroclastic explosion. Now, what about the scroll when it's rolled up? As he looked up in the sky and the ash plume blew toward the heavens, toward the sky, he noticed the mushroom cloud tucking. And so he used that picture as like a scroll when you roll it out and you let go. It springs back. And so it's like a scroll rolling back. It's rolling up. The problem is he was looking up at a mushroom cloud from underneath.
And he could only describe it in terms of things that he has seen or
exactly.
Items that he knows.
Exactly right. So what he was describing was probably a Mount St. Helens type, blow-off, pyroclastic explosion. And when he looked up and saw the mushroom cloud, he used that descriptor. Now, when you think about it, that is a very, very accurate description. Feeling the concussion, feels like he's blown away.
Mm-hmm.
The sky was split apart.
Could he have been talking about some kind of nuclear bomb?
No. No, this is a pyroclastic explosion.
All right.
And the mushroom cloud is blowing off. Wormwood is pulling down and stressing on the crust of the Earth right now, so that you're getting a lot of earthquakes in strange places that haven't had them for very long times.
Okay.
And they're blowing up. They're creaking. They're groaning. The whole crust of the Earth is under stress right now because this thing is pulling so hard. Item number 6: every mountain and island were moved out of their places. That sounds like tectonic shifting to me.
Huge shifting.
Huge tectonic shifting. When Wormwood was finished pulling on the tectonic plates down there by Sumatra, and the bucking and the rolling was finished, the whole island of Sumatra was displaced, I think, something like about 110 feet. The tectonic plate actually slid that much. That's a lot of slide.
That's huge.
But then the tsunami kicked off, and we probably lost something like 250,000 people.
Jeez.
Okay, so the earthquake didn't do that much damage, but the tsunami was very deadly.
That did it all. That's right.
Okay, now, St. John does not mention tsunami events. But I think it's a reasonable thing to say that if you're going to get mountains and islands shifting around, there's got to be something hitting some coast somewhere.
Well, and you know, Gil, that the one in the Canary Islands, if that thing goes, that if that shifts into the sea, they're talking about a tsunami of 600 feet tall that would hit the eastern seaboard of the United States, 50 miles inland, at least.
Mm-hmm. You want to hear something scary? Scary?
You mean scarier than that?
Scarier than that. Wormwood is right on the axis, if you take the axis that the Earth is tilting at right now, 23.45 degrees. Wormwood lines up perfectly on that axis. It comes in on the summer solstice side, arches. It comes in between the center line of the orbit of Jupiter and the center line of the orbit of the asteroid belt, right up between Jupiter and the asteroids. It arcs up over the sun. It gets close enough to the Earth to actually exchange atmospheric gases and cause problems. We can talk about that in a minute. Arcs up over the sun and comes back down the other side and goes back down between the asteroid belt and Jupiter again. So the perihelion arc over is really up close and personal. Okay? When this thing is finished, it can slip and slide. This thing can turn the crust of the Earth right over on its side. If it makes the crust of the Earth shift 1 degree, you're going to be staring at 1,200-foot tsunamis.
Oh, my God.
Hang on. If it shifts the crust of the Earth 5 degrees, you will be staring at 3,000-foot tsunamis.
Which seems possible.
Because it's already twisted the Earth over on its side 23.5 degrees, exactly. This thing is largely responsible for where the Earth is sitting, its axis, angle of axis rotation relative to, the ecliptic plane. And it's also responsible for the tectonic shifting that has produced the picture of the continents and the islands and the oceans and all the rest of it that we have now.
And is it true? Is it right to assume that almost every natural catastrophe that has occurred on this planet, whether it's the flood from Noah's era, was caused by this wormwood?
Well, it turns out that it lines up time-wise to the flood from Noah's era. It also lines up time-wise to the exodus of the children of Israel and their escape from Egypt. This people don't understand, but wormwood is so strong that when it gets in up close and personal, it can reach right through the Earth, all the way through the Earth, and pull a continent down under the waves on one side of the Earth and pull a continent up out of the waves on the other side of the Earth and do it in 20 minutes.
Should we say Atlantis?
Does Atlantis ring a bell?
Yeah.
What about Lemuria?
Yeah.
They were there. Not anymore. Well, excuse me. I shouldn't say that. Not now. There's a very good chance that you're going to see Atlantis rising in 2012. That's wormwood talking. Reaching down, it can actually distort the plastic mantle underneath the crust, make it bulge, so that it bulges up, and the sea rolls off the top, and there you've got dry land again.
Gilbert, let me ask you a strange question.
Go ahead.
And that is, do you think I heard this years ago, that the pyramids were put where they are as earthquake protectors, stabilizers. Do you think that they could have been built because they knew of this wormwood and they thought maybe these structures could protect that landmass or that area?
Boy, that's a good one.
That is a long, it's a long shot.
That's a real tough question. Right up front, to be honest, I haven't looked into the physics of that.
Okay.
To be sure, the pyramids are so very heavy. When the pyramid is being constructed, they have a bridge piece of stonework in there that actually cracked because of the settling from the weight, and they didn't know if they had to replace it or not, so they plastered it to see if the plaster would also chip, which would tell them whether I had to go back and put another stone in place because they had to adjust the positions. But there's so much we don't know about the pyramids. You had a guest on who was describing finding liquid mercury down by the pyramid here in Mexico, or Belize, I guess it is. Or it's Mexico, isn't it? Yucatan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right about that area.
The Mayan pyramids.
Right in Central America.
Right. Okay. So there is some evidence that, the pyramids may have been power supplies. It's also possible that they were operating on some extremely advanced principles, the kind of stuff that only a Nikola Tesla would know. Who really knows for sure? Whatever was happening, the Mayans were so far ahead of us on so many things and so far behind on others. But it was just, there's just some very strange and very intriguing architecture and technology that are tied up in the pyramids. I know there's one granite stone, one of the authors was claiming. They went in and checked. It had been ground so fine, so accurate, that across a span of 6 feet, and he measured it with a very accurate ruler gauge that he had brought with him, across a span of 6 feet, it was accurate to less than 1,000th of an inch. Well, that's approaching the kind of microflat grinding that we use in the machine shop to do our gauge settings for tool and die work.
Good point.
Okay, I mean, that is really good. That is not the kind of stuff that you can, grind by hand. Somebody knew what they were doing. And because the evidence tends to suggest the pyramids are a lot older than what we think they are, my apologies to Mr. Hawass. There may be there's got to be a lot of stuff tied up in the pyramids, the technology. It does tend to suggest that somebody like Enoch or somebody of his caliber was involved in building them, because there's just too much technique and technology involved.
I don't want to hit you up with a timeline, but I'm going to have to, because these events are so frightening. And if prophecy and revelation is accurate, and I'm beginning to believe it is, there's a schedule there, and it's laid out for us. Over what time period will all these things occur? 7 years?
Well, that's the tribulation period. And George, I have to preface this. Personally, to be real honest, I don't want this to be true.
I know you don't.
I mean, I got, a 3-foot grandson. I'd like to see what he looks like when he's 6 feet. I'd like to see what the granddaughters look like when they're, 16, 17,
I hear you.
18. Find out what's going on in their lives. I don't want the destruction of civilization to happen, right? It's jolly inconvenient. But I would be remiss as an investigator if I didn't try to get your attention, or Lisa or somebody, and try to get this information out, just in case it is true. But the hard part of the problem for me is that it does look like it is true, and that it's coming true on this timeline. So we just described the summer of 2009 events. If this is confirmed within the next few weeks or so, and again, hopefully not, but the only thing I can do is just cross my fingers, because that's a nasty list that we just read.
Oh, and now, will they all occur in the summer of this year?
Yes. All right. If this is true, and as if I've guessed this correctly, and I'm guessing, but it looks like that's the period pressure. Okay.
But what if you're a year off? What if it happens next year? My God, it's still horrible.
It's still a very horrible thing. Then all you do is you just take the same schedule that I have proposed in the book and slide it back a year. We get a year's reprieve.
All right, let me ask you this. If you're wrong in terms of the timing, why would you be wrong?
Don't know.
And you don't think you are wrong.
It is for something I can't, that I must have forgotten, or that I don't know. But I'm just hoping that there's something, that there's a hole I've missed.
All right, let me rephrase it.
And I don't want it to be true, but it does look like it is.
Why do you think it's happening in the summer of 2009?
Okay, the pattern pressure that I was looking at, it started in 1821 with the discovery that the orbit of Uranus was a full degree deflected from where it should have been. Now, keep in mind, at the time, the scientists were they had developed the math, the calculus, complements of Leibniz and those people, so they can pretty well tell where things should have ought to been. But a 1 degree deflection, as measured from planet Earth, even though the telescopes of the day could only measure accurately to 1/10 of a degree, a 1 degree deflection was huge. 10 times measurable error. So Alexis Bouvard found out when he was looking at Uranus, he said, you know what? This thing is supposed to be over here, but instead it's over there. And what you have then is physical evidence pointing to something pulling on it. Well, Mary Somerville, a very brilliant English mathematician who wasn't allowed to be part of the university system because she was a lady. They didn't mind reading her books, but they wouldn't let her go to school.
And give her credit for it.
Yeah, she suggested there'd be another planet out there behind Uranus, and she was correct. John Couch Adams did the math and gave it to George Airy at the Royal Observatory, and he sat on it. A year later, Urbain Le Verrier did the same kind of calculations and sent the stuff by mail to Johann Gall at the Berlin Observatory, and that night they discovered Neptune.
Ah, okay.
Now, that was true that you had a way to account for Uranus, except for one slight problem, and that was Neptune was also running under a perturbed orbit. Now, this is where the term Planet X came from, because you had planets out to Neptune, and Planet X was whatever it was that was pulling on Neptune and causing it to be deflected in its orbit.
Was Planet X, Wormwood, was it out that way somewhere?
Planet X, Wormwood, comes from up underneath. It's a long elliptic orbit. It comes up from underneath, cuts through the ecliptic plane, again, between Jupiter and the asteroid belt.
Okay.
Arcs up over the sun and goes back down through the ecliptic plane and then back out to deep space. So it was pulling on them from down below. But It was pulling on them on the summer solstice side.
How close did it have to get to create that pull, Gil?
It has been pulling since 1821 that we know of.
Almost 200 years.
Yes. Figure the sun has a gravitational reach that goes out, half a light year.
Okay.
Its ability to generate node rings goes out to about 4.5 light hours. Okay, the radius of the orbit of Neptune. So its gravitational reach is way beyond its ability to generate node rings. So the same would be true for Wormwood. Its gravitational reach was beyond the node rings by a whopping factor, enough to be able to pull on a gas giant and dislodge it from orbit.
Gil, when we come back, let's find out, what does NASA know and why aren't we being told? We'll be back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM.